Hello, friends. Happy 2024. You are listening to the I Used to Think podcast, a podcast about the stories of people who are brave enough to change their mind. If this is your first time listening, welcome. I just released an episode recapping the last 2 years of the podcast, when I started this in February of 2022 all the way through this past year. So if you're new to the podcast, feel free to give that a listen, and it'll give you an idea of the type of conversations and interviews that I have with people on this podcast. I also detail a few goals and changes that I want to make going into this year. With that being said, today's guest is Caleb. Caleb is a good friend of mine. We actually first met about a year ago, and he brought up an idea for the podcast, and we decided to just go for it. His topic is deeply influenced by 2 trips that he took to India and the culture shock he received, he experienced when he was there, really changed his perspective of the world and his place in the world. He also is a big fan of statistics, so we spend this section of today's interview talking about some world population statistics, some of which may surprise you. I know it did when I first heard it. My favorite is probably what percentage of the world is American, and I think the answer may surprise you. Other topics we cover are ethnocentrism and population growth. Caleb brings a very well thought out and nuanced perspective of culture and what it means to look at other cultures and other countries while recognizing that you have your own view of what life should look like and what happiness should look like. So let's start the conversation. Ready?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, we'll start easy with the icebreaker. I've actually been doing that recently.
Are we recording?
Yes.
We're recording right now.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Okay. Great.
Just pretend I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been starting with the icebreaker because I found that it's a cool way to start the conversation without, here are this person's credentials, here's this person's background. I'd rather the listener get to know you as a person from the get-go. So today's icebreaker, since we were talking a lot about ages and population growth and things like that, what is your ideal retired life look like?
My ideal retired life. Oh, geez. Retirement, I have a complicated view of retirement.
Okay.
I don't think that I'm a person who wants to retire from work. So it's one of those things where I would love to be in a place in my elder years where I don't have to work for money, so I don't have that pressure.
Okay, right.
But I think an ideal retired life for me is going to be living in a place with a community of people that I get along with, and having some sort of daily purpose other than just bringing enjoyment to myself. You know, I think I'm going to have to find something a little bit bigger.
Does any specific place or community come to mind?
Honestly, I saw an episode on Netflix of this show called The Most Amazing Homes in the World.
Okay.
And it's a really gaudy show. I mean, the houses are insane. But they profiled this really unique home in Japan where these elderly people kind of lived more communally in this really cool house. And I think I would like something kind of like that. I don't want to live alone. I think in my elder years, I think I would want to live with other people in a house and kind of more of a shared life.
Okay.
Where it is, just not somewhere cold. Yeah.
Meaning above 60 in the winter?
I don't know if I want to be dealing with snow.
Okay.
So, yeah. I mean, the place that comes to my mind is the desert, Palm Springs or Palm Desert, but that's also really hot. So I'm not sure about the place. I just know the kind of life that I'd want to live.
In that example you gave with the Japanese community? Do they have assigned responsibilities and that kind of a thing?
I think they do. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was more in this example of the show. I think it was two sisters that owned a home,
Okay.
a really unique home, and they rented out rooms or provided a home for these other people their age. And there were activities and they cooked together.
Right.
And I think they were kind of artists, so they did art. But it was kind of designed for them, for people in their life stage.
Okay.
Even the way the house was designed, it had ramps and
Yeah, accessible.
but it was really aesthetic. I mean, it was really beautiful because it was on that show. So it was very unique.
It was basically the world's nicest senior housing.
Basically, yeah. And I think it was in rural Japan or something, forest area.
Right.
Yeah.
And once you move there, you'll probably live till 125, 130.
I gather they were quite old and doing really well. They probably ate really good diets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you have in mind for occupation, I guess, quote unquote occupation, because you didn't necessarily want to work for money. So would you make art? Would you build custom chessboards?
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I'm asking that question now in life. So, I'm not 100% sure. Just something useful to people. I'm a helper by temperament. I just enjoy doing things and seeing the value of the work that I do, helping other people. So just anything to where I can bring value.
Okay.
And feel good about it. Yeah.
Okay. We'll keep this episode, and then in 40 years or something, we'll see if it came true.
If it came true. No, please hold me accountable to that. Remember, tell me what I said so that I don't forget.
I'm really excited about this episode. I just want to say, first of all, I appreciate all the research you put into this. Caleb sent me I'm holding in my hand, well, it's double-sided, but a 4-page, essentially thesis on his topic today. And it's appropriate, though, because it is a very complicated topic, I think. There's a lot that goes into it. And I enjoyed reading through all your notes and as well as the articles that you quoted. Caleb, what is your I used to think statement?
So my I used to think statement is, I used to think the US was the center of the world. Then I went to India.
Okay. All right. Let's unpack this. Let's do this. I think first question a listener would have briefly is, why did you go to India? And then what was India like?
Yeah, so I'm in my early 30s now, and in my 20s I had the opportunity to travel quite a bit. Never for a super, super long time, but a lot of trips to different places around the world. And so India was the place I spent the most time. So the first time, it was right after I graduated from college, and I went on a missions trip with my university, and we taught English as a second language in the slum area in New Delhi, India, for 3 weeks. And then I went back 5 years later. So my first trip was in 2014, and then my second trip was in 2019. It was funny. I was in India both times that Narendra Modi was elected prime minister. So
I'm not familiar.
He's the prime minister, and he got elected in 2014. I was there when that happened. And then in 2019, it happened again, because their elections are every 5 years.
Okay.
But yeah, so then in 2019, I went back for 7 weeks just on a more personal basis, which is a whole story for another time. But I went to seek the health advice of an Ayurvedic doctor. So, which is super crazy. And yeah, a story for another time. But I was there for 7 weeks the second time and 3 weeks the first time. When
you first brought up to me that you went to India to see a doctor, this didn't even cross my mind, but Jess said that is very Doctor Strange of him.
Very Doctor Strange of me.
Have you seen the first Doctor Strange?
I have not. Okay. So I'm going to have to get context for that.
He's a surgeon. He goes to another country to get his hand looked at because he can't find any cure in the US.
Yeah. So it was a similar situation for me too. Yeah, very Doctor Strange of me, for sure. So yeah, the first time I went, I was in New Delhi for 3 weeks. And then the second time I went, I spent 1 week in Mumbai, but the rest of the time was in a town called Pune, which is 3 hours southeast of Mumbai.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. You have it here on the email, but what was your first impression once you landed?
I'll be honest, I was pretty scared
Okay.
to go to India.
I think I would too. I haven't been.
Yeah, I'm a white middle class Westerner from Southern California, who's lived a very comfortable life in a lot of ways. And, India is the country that is probably the most foreign to to me. And so I remember when I signed up for that trip with Cal Baptist, which is where I went, I was like, this is crazy. I never thought that I would ever go here. And I was nervous. I was nervous. I remember landing there. The plane was landing, and we flew Emirates, which is this really nice Middle Eastern airline, and they have cameras that you can watch outside of the airplane. And they have a landing gear camera, which is really cool. And I just remember watching us land on the landing gear camera, and I could tell I am in a very different place. And I have no idea what to expect. Absolutely no idea what to expect. And immediately everything was different. I mean, even just exiting the airport, we didn't queue to get out of the airport. Everybody just kind of went in a mob through this little funnel exit.
Okay.
And we almost got into an accident with a truck on the road going to our hotel. It was an abrupt start, but there's no other way to start. It's the traffic rules are totally different. Everything was different.
So I'll read a little bit of how you described it. You said the language is different, the density, road rules and traffic, sense of personal space, the food and the taste and the smells, everything is different. Did you feel like you got used to anything after a certain amount of time, or it was more okay, preparing yourself every single day to just kind of go out into the world and make it through the day?
Yeah, no, you get used to certain things. So yeah, it challenged me. So that first time that I was there, yes, the sense of personal space is different. There are so many people. I mean, there's 1.4 billion people in the country. We were in Delhi, which is a massive city.
Right.
And so we were taking our mode of transport for the first trip that I was there. We took the metro a lot. And then we also took auto rickshaws a lot. And the metro was packed. I mean, I've been on metros all over the world, but this took the cake in terms of the number of people that you can pack on a train. And just getting on the train, having to fight through people to make sure that you got onto the train from the platform. I mean, brushed up right up against people for a long time. So it was super fun. I loved it. It was so different and it was fun. You just had to prepare yourself before you went out of the bed and breakfast that we were staying in and being, okay, let's do this, because even crossing the street, hailing rickshaws and negotiating the price.
Okay.
And the language barrier.
Right.
Yeah, it was a lot to navigate.
I had a friend who went for a wedding in 2018 or 19. It was actually one of our good friends' wedding and I couldn't make it. But he was describing to me how it was probably the first time in his life he was in a situation where he thought he was actually going to die, was being on a rickshaw, driving through a mountainous area. And he's asking himself, how in the world is the suspension on this thing still okay? And I think it was raining as well. But that's one of the reasons. I think you said scared. I don't know if there's a word that describes being more than just scared. I hate being on boats. I hate being on very rough car rides.
Yep.
And so anything like that would just absolutely freak me out.
It's I would say probably one of the most shocking things to someone who has never been there before is the way that the roads operate.
Mm-hmm.
It feels a free for all. Now, it isn't. There's just different rules.
Okay.
But if you're on the roads taking a rickshaw in a big city, Delhi or Mumbai, there are tons of rickshaws, tons of motorbikes, tons of cars, just kind of going for it. Now, there are obviously directions that you move in, but there aren't lights here. There aren't as many traffic lights there are in the US. So it feels really chaotic. And they use their horn to communicate in a completely different way. Here, if somebody honks a horn at you, you can easily be offended.
There's some malice there, or some intent.
Right. Oh, wow. This guy's being a jerk or whatever.
Right.
There, I mean, the auto rickshaw driver is constantly using the horn to either let other people know that he's coming, let someone know that he's going to overtake them.
Okay.
Or he's upset, or, it can mean so many different things. It's almost a tool.
Okay.
For driving.
Like a communication device.
And it can feel Mr. Toad's Wild Ride a little bit. And when I was there, I mean, I think I routinely overpaid. I tried to negotiate a little bit.
Okay. Trying to be polite.
Yeah, I mean, the exchange rate is really favorable to the dollar, right? So I don't want to be miserly or whatever, but towards the end of my trips there, I would try to negotiate down a little bit. And even still, I remember one time, this is my last night on my second trip there, I tried to negotiate down with a rickshaw driver coming outside the mall, just saying, This is too expensive. 400 rupees to go 3 blocks. No, come on, man. And I talked him down to like 200.
Okay.
And this young kid, when we got done with the ride, he was just beaming. He had gotten a great price.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And yeah, it was funny, and I'm totally fine with that. But it's really an experience driving there. And I was really scared to cross the street. I remember being in Mumbai, needing to get somewhere, but not knowing. I had crossed the street successfully many, many times, but this was a big boulevard, and I was just like, there's no way that I can cross the street. It's just not going to happen. There isn't a crosswalk in the right area. There's too many cars. It's not gonna happen.
In reference to negotiating, my last trip to Taiwan, which was almost exactly a year ago, when I would go into small shops, I learned really quickly not to speak English because I could pass as a Taiwanese native, but once I spoke English, they knew, right? I was from the United States.
Got it, yeah.
So I had to remind myself, don't speak English until, after I buy my item, because once they hear the fluent English, I mean, all of a sudden this item becomes 5 times more expensive.
Yes.
And yeah, it was just such an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, it was the same way there for sure. There was the white Westerner price, and then there was the locals price. And I knew that. Yeah, right. It wasn't a big deal, but yeah, it's pretty funny.
Okay, I'll let you get into the good part now about going back to your statement, right? The US was the center of the world, then I went to India. So yeah, I'll let you start. Where in this would you like to explain that statement?
Yeah, so I think regarding the statement, you grow up in your culture, you grow up in your country,
right?
And there's a tendency for every human being, this is a universal experience, for you to think that your way of life is what's normal. Or that your country or that your life experience is kind of the center of the universe, because it's the center of your universe.
Right.
It's what you experience on a daily basis. And so growing up in the US, the US is just the economic juggernaut of the world. We have such a cultural influence on the rest of the world. And we have a really high quality of life and living in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a certain sense of superiority that comes along with that, a feeling of American superiority. And so it can feel, at least to me growing up, I felt, man, yeah, the US is the center of the world. We're the best. We're like the best. And so relating it to I used to think, I would say, yeah, growing up, I thought America was the bomb. We had it figured out. We were culturally superior and people needed to be more like us. And yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I love America. I'm an American. And I think there's a lot of great things about America. But I mean, I would say I used to think America was the center of the world. Then I went to India. What I mean by that is just traveling around the world and then particularly going to India where there's so many people and it's so different. It's really the population thing. It's really the people thing.
Okay.
I mean, I think I was just blown away by how many human beings there were living a completely different life and experience to me. And so it kind of changed the way I look at the center of the world. It's not to say India is the center of the world, but I'm just
right.
I'm just kind of blown away by the fact that there's 1 billion people in India, 1 billion people in China, and 1 billion people in Africa. And there's only 330 million Americans. And it kind of made me think differently about the human experience.
Right. I'll let you give the statistic on what percent of the world's population is in the United States, because this blew my mind.
4%. 4%. Now, population data, from what I've gathered, is kind of a little bit of a inaccurate science. I don't even think that we actually know the total number of people in the world. I think it's estimated around 8 billion. I think we hit 8 billion in 2022.
Okay.
But give or take, there's only 4% of the world's population that are American.
I can't even 4 out of 100 people.
Yeah. And we have such an outsized impact on the rest of the world.
Yes, as far as influence and cultural influence.
But population wise, I think it was kind of humbling and kind of revealing for me. And to realize that 96% of the world does not have my life experience. And I don't want this to sound, kid from America goes overseas and realizes that he's not the center of the world. I don't want it to come across that. I just think this is what happens, right? When people travel, this is what happens when you go around the world. Your mind expands a little bit because you've seen how that there are other people around the world living differently than you. So it's a good thing. It's a mentally expanding experience.
Right. And at some point during this conversation, I want to expand on, because you said that it is ultimately a good thing. And I think acknowledging that being able to travel is a privilege. I mean, not everybody gets to do it. Not everybody gets to travel within the United States. But let's see. I'm flipping the page here now on this email. You had an alternate I used to think statement. So I think I'll let you bring that up and then let's define some terms within that because I think it would be helpful.
Yeah. So my alternate I used to think statement was, maybe a more fun thing to say would be, I used to be ethnocentric and now I try not to be.
Okay.
I guess that's not really I used to think statement, which is why I went with the other statement. But yeah, I guess I used to be ethnocentric and now I try not to be, would be the way that I would phrase that. And really that's capturing the same idea. So I guess let me define what ethnocentrism is.
Okay.
That was a term that I learned in anthropology in college, and it always kind of stuck with me, the idea of it. But really all it means is to apply one's own culture or ethnicity as a frame of reference to judge other cultures, practices, behaviors, beliefs, and people, instead of using the standards of the particular culture involved. It's just viewing the world and other people through the lens of your own experience and not being able to put yourself in another person's shoes or another culture's shoes when thinking about their customs or their way of life.
Right.
You know, kind of the view that I used to have where America is the best and we're superior and everything. I mean, that's viewing it through my culture, you know, like, whereas a more nuanced point of view would be, well, so just because something's different doesn't mean that it's bad. Or just because I think I have a better way of doing something doesn't mean that there isn't also another way of doing something that is equally okay.
Right.
I think the negative part of ethnocentrism, because everybody is ethnocentric to a certain degree, the negative part is where you apply a superiority to it.
Right.
And it's, okay, my culture is superior and better, and the others are inferior. I mean, it's not that things aren't better or worse, but there are some things that are kind of just cultural, and that's okay.
Right. I think it's important to bring up that there is a negative side to ethnocentrism, because I think it was just the Wikipedia page on ethnocentrism saying that sometimes it has a negative connotation, but based on its original definition, it actually doesn't. It's just, as you were saying, a way of looking at your own culture and a way of looking at others' culture. And I think that's important to bring up because people, I've heard it used as a way to, wait, let me rephrase this. I agree with you in that there are things about the United States that are unique and better in the sense of, okay, depending on the standard, if you want to look at, you mentioned earlier, the quality of life, the United States on average has a much better quality of life. There are things about the United States that are unique as far as seeing how individuals in the United States might have better access to healthcare or things that. So we actually haven't talked about this, but when you say that you used to be ethnocentric, used to think America was the best, what did you mean by that? Was it as far as economically? Was it political views? What did you mean by America was the best?
I think that I kind of grew up with an idea that America is the best, kind of mixed in with also my religious upbringing. So it was kind of, America is God's country, and we're uniquely blessed, and we're successful because we're uniquely blessed by God.
Right.
And it was kind of a mixture. It wasn't just, oh, you know, the data shows that Americans are healthier and more successful and richer than their counterparts. It was more of, no, our ideas, our system of government, our founding, all of that is superior to the rest of the world. And it's led to us having a better way. Yeah, I think that's kind of what it was. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes. It sounds like a lot of it was rooted in the founding of the country, and you hinted at Christian nationalism, which I think a lot of that comes from the idea that the founding fathers were uniquely chosen, divinely chosen to start this country, this city on a hill, which has been used. I think that might be a Puritan phrase.
Yeah, and it ties in with the idea of American exceptionalism, and like that America is exceptional and was kind of been set apart. And it kind of ties in today to that idea that we need to keep it that way, and that we're under threat from ideas outside and ideas within, and we need to preserve that. It gets a little complicated, but I mean, that's kind of the way I'm just describing. That's the thought process of my upbringing.
Okay.
And so those were the ideas that I was familiar with.
You talked about social norms in India that are not social norms here in the United States.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, you know, there's an interesting, you see a lot of different things abroad. And so one of the things in India that was kind of weird when I saw it is that people will hold hands. Two men who are friends will hold hands or be far more affectionate in public than you would see in the US. So, here, if you see two men holding hands, it's viewed in more of a sexualized lens or more of a relationship lens. Oh, they must be gay or something like that. In India, two best friends who are not gay in any way can hold hands in public as a show of affection and closeness. And culturally, it's only perceived as that. So, as a Westerner, I saw this a lot. Okay. And it was kind of weird. I was, what is going on?
Right.
And I mean,
just constantly double taking.
Yeah. I'm just like, what is going on? And, then, the people I was with, and then I did some online research and realized, no, this is viewed completely differently here. So yeah, that would just be an example of a cultural custom that is not good or bad. It's just different.
Right.
It's just different. And something can be viewed through a different lens depending on where you're living.
Yeah. So kind of circling back earlier to ethnocentrism, and you mentioned it's an anthropology term. I have a friend who is an anthropologist in undergrad, and she defined for me what anthropology was, because I feel like it's one of those classes that when you're in college, everyone says, oh, you should take Anthro 1 or whatever, because it's easy and it fills a requirement, but no one really knows anything past that. And she said anthropology is unique because, especially in contrast to sociology, sociologists are usually the people who observe a culture from an outside perspective.
Okay.
Someone who comes in and, gathers data, observational data, and maybe, puts together information on how a culture functions, but it's all from, you mentioned, maybe their own perspective.
So they would put together a sociological profile of this place or something like that, an assessment.
Yes, it seems the birth rate is this, and women seem to have this role in society and things like that.
Yeah.
And anthropologists, historically, according to my friend, will actually immerse themselves within that culture and society rather than being outside of it and observing it outside. So I guess rather than observational data, it's almost experiential data where they will be part of it. They will do their best to learn the culture's norms, to understand from within the culture how it functions. And a lot of, from what my friend was saying, a lot of what we understand about even what the definition of a tribe is and things like that come from anthropology. And I think there's a place for sociology. I also think there's a place for anthropology. But to a certain extent, I feel anthropology does every culture justice because it takes the time to be immersed in it and to be a part of it. And so, I don't know if somebody just looking from the outside would necessarily, or say maybe they just did all the research off the internet, didn't really go to India, would pick up on some of the things you did. So I mentioned other customs. We already said the horn honking.
Yes, that was very different.
And talk a little bit about the advertisements you saw in the newspapers.
Yeah. So, in the West, in America, people get married for love, and I feel like this is, they do in India too, to a certain degree, but I love reading the newspaper when I go to certain places. Right now, I have to admit, I was picking up English newspapers in India. So I'm already, the thing about India is there's 22 languages listed in the Constitution. There's even more languages that are spoken. The whole country doesn't speak the same language. Half the country speaks Hindi, but sometimes if there's different people from different regions and they have to speak the language that's common to them, and sometimes maybe it's only English or another language.
Okay.
So I only experienced urban India for a time.
Right.
There's many different regions, many different languages, so I picked up an English newspaper in a city. So I'm getting the flavor of that world.
Right.
that world, so not to speak broadly about all the customs of the country, but what I saw was something that you would not see in the US, I guess, in the same way. And it was they were matrimonial advertisements, classified ads to find a husband or a wife. And it was broken down by religion, caste, so your social rank in society, and really those two things, and maybe region or something like that. But so fascinating to read, because you go to this section of the newspaper and it would literally say something, Muslim family looking for Muslim man to marry their daughter. Daughter is 26 years old, such and such education, and does such and such job.
Okay.
Or it would be Brahmin Hindu family looking for a wife for their doctor son, looking for someone of equal status. He's 29 and slim. Like it, WhatsApp this number. So fascinating. So fascinating. And I don't know all of the dynamics behind that, but it obviously there's a little bit of a different approach to love and relationships, right? It's not just finding someone who makes you happy and that you love. Right. And if your family likes them, great. If they don't, well,
yes, as a byproduct of your relationship.
Right. Your family may not like them, or they might like them. If they like them, great. That's a good thing. But I feel like in America, most young people are just going to marry who they want to marry. And, if mom and dad don't like it, then whatever.
What stood out to me about the ad was no mention of these are their interests. This is what they do in their downtime. They would love to travel to these places. It was all very...
Yeah. Honestly, I can say with confidence that in the ads that I read, I never saw really anything like that. It was mainly focused on the social standing.
Right.
And I think, the marriage thing, I'm sure love marriage obviously happens in India, just here. But I think marriage is viewed a little bit differently, and then it's kind of a social contract. It's kind of a transaction between two families. We're trying to find an ideal pairing to further the advancement of our families, which honestly, I think historically is pretty normal in a lot of places.
Yeah.
It might actually be the case that this obsession with romantic love that we tend to have in Western culture, especially in the last 100 years, might be the abnormal thing.
Yeah. And that's a really good example of this theme that we're talking about, where, okay, 4%, this is not historically what has been the case. This one, actually, I want to bring up too, because you told me that in Delhi, the metro or the train cars were segregated into men-only cars and women-only cars.
Yeah, I had to look into this because this was actually pretty weird to me, because I took the metro a lot and there were women's only cars on the metro. And this is not just in India, this is in other countries too. But it was kind of confusing. I was like, why? I mean, I've been in subways and metros all over, they're all co-ed. But when I did some online research, it really came down to, I think it is a density thing. Again, there's a lot of people, and I think they were having sexual assault problems or even just groping problems on the trains. And so it was just it was safer to have dedicated cars for women and then school-aged children. I'm not an expert on this. The dynamic between men and women in India seemed different to me. I remember this was in 2014 when I was in Delhi. There's a lot of things all over the city that are just painted or posters or PSAs almost kind of all over the city about the environment or about any sort of social issue. And then one of the things that I kept seeing over and over again all over the city when I was there was this poster that said, "When a woman speaks, listen." And so I'm not 100% sure how women are viewed in India, all the complications around that, but it did seem different. It seemed that they had a different social standing that is different than what I'm used to. In America, it was men and women are equal.
Right.
And there it didn't seem totally that. It seemed a woman's voice or a woman's point of view was not always viewed the same way as a man's point of view. And I think even the way women were treated, I think sometimes was different. And that manifested itself in something, we need to have a train car for just women because, men might be inappropriate in close quarters in a train car, which seems insane to me. I can't imagine going on a metro system and seeing a man do something like that. But it's a reality. It's real.
What it stood out to me is that in the United States, when we hear of segregation or even see segregation, I'm sure in some parts of the country still, we associate that with a certain group of people being put down. And so it sounds, based on what you're saying, it's actually for the protection of the women in this case.
At least in the online research I did, yes, it was more of a practical protection thing. We've had problems, and this is not just India, but other countries too. We've had problems with sexual assault, and one way of solving that is just to create a safe space for women only on the train.
Right. Got it. I want to go into the statistics that you put together so nicely. I don't know if we mentioned your background, but you are an accountant.
Yes.
So you do love numbers. You have your master's of public administration.
Yes. Yeah. Basically local government. I work in local government.
Got it. I'll let you go for it because I think these excite you.
Yeah. No, a couple, even before this episode, last year sometime, I kind of just did a deep dive on population statistics and age expectancy statistics.
Okay.
Because this whole podcast, right? It's about I used to think.
Right.
So something that really has changed the way that I see the world, in particular, the time in which we live, is some of this data about population growth over the 20th and 21st centuries.
Okay.
And I don't think people realize how crazy transformative some of this stuff has been over the last 100 years.
I can confirm this for myself because you brought this up in a conversation a couple weeks ago and my mind was blown.
Yeah, I mean, it's staggering. If people let these statistics sink in, it's really crazy to think about. And so just for some context, I was doing some research on businesses related to the elderly and older age people last year. And so I was looking into how many people over 65 are there and how many there used to be and how many are there going to be in the future? And so this kind of made me uncover this stuff. But okay, for example, now again, grain of salt, population data is tough. These are give or take numbers, but they're from a good source. They're from the UN.org. Okay, population. In the year 1900, it is estimated that there were only 1.3 billion people on the planet.
You said 1900.
1900. Okay. So turn of the 20th century. Theodore Roosevelt is president, digging the Panama Canal, all that stuff. Okay. It is estimated there were 1.3 billion people on the planet. By 1950, that had doubled. So there were 2.8 billion people.
Okay.
Until we get to 2022, last year, and there are 8 billion people. So in 120 years, global population has gone up by over 6.5 billion people. that is more people than population has never grown that fast.
Right.
That is an insane number, because I don't know how they really know this, but the estimate is that there were only between 200 and 300 million people alive at the time of Jesus. So, 0 AD.
And I looked up the current population in the US is about 330 million.
Right. So there were only a little bit less people on the entire planet than currently live in the US when Jesus was living.
Okay.
And it took us 1900 years to get to 1.3 billion people.
Yeah, it was slow. Growth was a lot slower.
It was really slow. And I don't know I'm not a doctor. I don't know all the reasons for all of that, but I mean, I know it has to do with technology. It has to do with child mortality and the death of mothers in childbirth and all sorts of stuff that go into that. But I was just blown away that we have added about 6.5 billion people since the turn of the 20th century to the global population. And the estimates are that we'll plateau somewhere around 10.5 billion in 2085. How we know that, I don't know, but that's what the models are predicting. And then if you want to have your mind blown even more, okay, well, if population is growing so much, where is it growing?
Good question.
And over half of the population growth that's anticipated between now and 2050 is going to be in Africa.
So is life expectancy increasing in Africa?
I think life expectancy is increasing everywhere.
Okay.
Everywhere in the world, in general. Actually,
Okay.
I think the US life expectancy went down a little bit. But in general, on the whole, average life expectancy is going way up. I mean, for context too, this just seems really low. This seems really low, okay? But this is from ourworldindata.org,
okay,
which I think is it's a data lab. It's a registered charity in England and Wales. Okay. So it seems
whatever that means for you for credibility.
Fairly legit,
right?
Legit to me. Okay. That average global life expectancy of someone in the 19th century was 29 years old.
I mean, in the United States, if you're 29, you're just about figuring out your life.
Yeah.
Right. You just stopped vaping or whatever, and you're.
Yeah, if you went to school, you're just out of school, you're in the first little bit of your career, maybe you're married, maybe you're not, figuring it out. You're like your 20s.
Yeah, you're like looking forward to the next 40 years, 50 years.
Well, on average in the 19th century, you might have been dead by 29.
You would have had so much wisdom to share to the younger generations as a 29-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, it's super crazy. I mean, but by 1950, average global life expectancy had gone up to 46 years old. In the US, it was 68. So there was definitely there's probably a disparity between developing countries and developed countries.
I'm sure.
And so I'm sure the average probably seems really low compared to a developed country with access to healthcare and a higher socioeconomic status. But average 19th century was 29. The year 1950, the average was 46 on a global level. And then in 2015, the average was 71.
Significant increase. Yeah.
Significant increase. So honestly, most of the stuff that I watch, there's this awesome YouTube channel and it's some guy from Sweden and it's called Small Circles Forward. And he does all of these interesting he does statistics and demographics, visualization with wood blocks.
Okay.
And he did this whole series about reasons to be positive about the world.
Oh.
And reasons that the world is a better place than ever. And he basically just gives all of these crazy statistics of how over the last 120 years, we've eradicated certain diseases and people are not dying of things they used to die of. And mothers aren't dying in childbirth as much as they used to. And babies are surviving and life expectancy has gone up and all of these amazing things. And you watch it and you feel really good. But I think that's proven by the life expectancy data of how technology is advanced. People are living longer. And thankfully, I mean, that's happening on a global level, not just in certain parts of the world.
Right. I'll include all this in the notes for fellow population nerds who want to geek out with us. But to tie this back into what we were saying earlier, so how do all these numbers affect the way you see the world or the center of the world? Go back to your statement.
I guess it directly to the statement, it's more of like most of the lived experience of human beings is not an American experience. So I used to think the US was the center of the world. Then I went to India. That's kind of tongue in cheek in the sense of there's just a lot of people, other places live in a different way of life. And so it's kind of nearsighted of me to think that where I live and the people group I'm a part of is the center of the world.
Right.
So really it's a population thing. That's what shifted my mind. And just me going to India was the catalyst for me starting to think about that. And so it changes the way I look at the world because I just ask, it kind of changes the way that I look at objective truth. So
okay, I
believe in objective truth. I believe that there are things that are true for everyone everywhere. Moral truths. I mean, obviously math is math everywhere. You know, there are things that are just true, right? They're objective truths. But I think what I've started to view differently is that maybe some of the things that I think are true or the way things ought to be are really just what I'm used to.
Ought to be, right.
Yeah. Like my sense of oughtness might be different than someone else's sense of oughtness. And that might not be a bad thing. It's just different.
Right. So after you brought up all this stuff on our initial phone call, I thought about the things that make up the American dream. And you've hinted on some of those things in our conversations. One being owning a lot of real estate, or at the very least, owning a home. I'm in the real estate industry. I talk about real estate a lot. People want to own a home. It's part of the American dream. And I will start off by saying, first, I don't think it's an objectively bad thing because it's my work.
Yeah.
So I want it to be a thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, though, that realizing this tension, right, between, okay, why is it that I want this so badly? Could I be okay? And I'll just talk about for myself because I do want to own a home.
Yeah.
Talking for myself, why do I want to do this? Like, will I be more okay? It's almost an issue of happiness. And I think this is where my mind went with comfort. I'll also use the word happiness is these conversations have made me see that my baseline for happiness could be much different if I chose to make it different. We mentioned Asia and how most people's housing situations are in Asia. I mentioned my friend who's currently in China. He was FaceTiming me from a high rise that he was staying at. It was his grandmother's apartment. And I can't say all of Asia, but I've been to Japan, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. My family is Taiwanese. Pretty much everyone lives in high rises. To throw in another statistic, I believe more people live in the city of Tokyo, Japan, than in all of Canada.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Yeah.
And he showed me a view from his grandmother's balcony of these 3 high-rise buildings. And if I remember correctly, each building has about 40 floors, and then each floor has 3 to 4 apartment units. And he was telling me, he said, Pat, do you realize that these 3 high-rises combined have about 10,000 people living in it?
So insane.
And I wondered to myself, okay, do these people think, man, I really wish I had more real estate? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they do.
Mm-hmm.
If they do, I might blame Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there are people who are happy that live in these confined spaces. And in their minds, they don't have a concept of, okay, this is a temporary thing. Eventually, I'll have a backyard.
Right, right.
And I think real estate and home is a good example to bring up because home matters to all of us as humans.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really important thing. There are only a few tribes throughout the world that are actually nomadic and have a sense of home.
Right.
I don't know. Did you bring that up? Or I might have heard
No,
that
I don't think
somewhere.
I did. You must have
Okay.
heard it somewhere else.
I heard it somewhere else. Um, and so, yeah, along the lines of this American dream thing, I found that, okay, I can choose to be happy where I'm at.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be a good example of something that is cultural.
Hmm.
You know, in the United States, we have certain expectations about the way we think life should be. And there is a particular answer to the question, I have arrived.
Hmm.
And part of arriving is owning a house and paying off that house, probably, hopefully. Or, and perhaps for some, I mean, this probably is different in different parts of the United States, depending on what you value.
Mm-hmm.
But for most people, that's probably a single family home with a yard and space for your family and space for the dog and all that stuff.
And maybe 2 refrigerators, the drink one and then the
Right?
regular one.
Absolutely. You got to have a fridge in the garage. You got to have a wine cooler. I mean, these Neanderthals that don't have that stuff. So, I mean, well, okay. So, and it's very contextual, right? Because in Southern California, I'm just hoping and praying to get on the property ladder at all.
Mm-hmm.
If you live in a cheaper part of the country and have means,
Right.
maybe for you, arriving is having your house, but then also having a shore house.
Right.
I've got a friend who his parents have a shore house in the Jersey Shore, and then they also have their house in Philadelphia. And a lot of people have that. And that's normal, I mean, yeah, normal for who? That's the thing about all of these standards, all of these answers to the question, I've arrived,
Yeah.
is it's all based on who you're around and the expectations of the people around you.
Yes.
So I think kind of what you alluded to of what is required to be happy as a human being.
Mm.
Owning a home, I don't think really is required. I think in the US, it might be a prerequisite, but I think it really doesn't have to do with ownership. It has to do with stability, having a place to live.
Right.
Having a stable place to live, whether you rent it or you own it, knowing where you can reliably be. I mean, I think that's kind of an instinctual human thing,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, needing your physical needs met. And I think because of our socioeconomic status in the US to a certain degree, getting your physical needs met is a lot higher than other places.
Right.
And it's funny because that can lead to a lot of discontentment. That can lead to a lot of feeling you haven't achieved enough. So you kind of have to analyze what the culture says should be your goals, decide if you think that they are worth it or truly valuable, and then kind of go from there. And it can be uncomfortable to be countercultural, especially to your realtor.
Yeah, I don't know. This episode might backfire on me.
Yeah.
We might start a whole movement of anti-homeowners.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example from my personal life. I really do want to own a house.
Yeah.
But I want to own a house because I want a stable, permanent place to live.
Mm-hmm.
But let me do a thought experiment with you. I like character and I like certain types of houses. Like I want like a historical house.
Okay.
if I can't afford that, I would rather rent in a place that I like
Right.
than own in a place I don't want to live.
And I think a lot of people are in that situation because of the pressure of ownership. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think people who love a place, think about a New Yorker, for example. I mean, most New Yorkers, I don't think they're going to own a house, right? But they love New York. And so they're okay with renting there.
Yeah.
So I think where you live and you like the place more than necessarily the dwelling, then you have to make trade-offs.
Right. Yeah. And that's something I noticed the difference between me and my wife, Jess, is I like the areas that I live, the people, the culture, the lifestyle, and she's much more of a homebody. And so for her, being able to be at home, have space, have comfortable amenities and appliances in the house do matter more to her. But that you bring up a good point because you used the word prioritization before. And I think for me, this conversation is a comfort because I'm seeing now, okay, I can choose to prioritize certain things rather than seeing them as expectations, right? I'm a failure if I don't reach the standard. I'm a failure if I don't achieve this thing. I'm curious, when you're in India, did you feel the people there were happy?
Yes.
Okay.
And that is so crazy to me in a lot of ways. That is why joy and happiness cannot be based on achievement. I'm not saying that there were people there living in some really hard situations because of the density. And I mean, I taught English as a second language in a slum area. I mean, these people had very little and were living in very close quarters in slum towns, often on illegal land. This whole community was on land that they didn't even own it.
Right.
I mean, then there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain. I mean, the human experience is painful. But I did see laughter and I did see joy and I saw kids running around and playing. And, it's funny. It exists there too, though, the status thing. Smartphones are a big deal.
Okay.
So the type of smartphone that you have is kind of a signal.
Do they care about iPhones?
Oh, iPhone is, for really bougie people.
Oh, I see. Okay.
At least that's what somebody told me once. Yeah, I mean, obviously, in every society, there's going to be some sort of ranking, some sort of signals of status or goals.
That's a good point.
But absolutely, everybody has expectations based on how they've grown up of what they think they need to be happy, the baseline that you mentioned. Oh, if I didn't have this, this, or this, how would I live?
Yeah.
I think their baseline is lower for some of the poor people that live there, but they still experience joy and happiness and family. And yeah, I think to overlay it with the Christian perspective, it's really about where your joy is. And life can be very difficult, but for some of the Christians that I met there, their joy was in the gospel. Their joy was in knowing Jesus, and they found a lot of comfort there. And so I think they were less maybe distracted by some of the material distractions that I might have in my life here.
I think that's a good segue to one of your last sections on Christianity implications. I don't know if that might have been a purposeful transition, so that was very smooth of you. What thoughts did you have on this, especially in regards to Christianity and how it is a universal religion?
Yeah, I think that was one of the also I used to think aspects of this. So I think I used to have a very American-centric idea of what Christianity was. And I think this happens in politics. And I mean, it's natural to wherever you live to want to advance what you think is good, true, and beautiful in that place. So I'm not saying it's bad to fight for certain things or advocate for what you believe in, or, overlay your Christian beliefs with the direction that you think America should go or another country should go. But I guess what my perspective shifted is that Christianity is a universal religion. It applies, if you believe Christianity, then you must believe that it applies to every human being living in every context around the world. Every human being is made in the image of God. So that means that Christianity, the message of it and the application of it, is relevant to a Muslim living in Indonesia, or a Hindu living in Delhi, or somebody living in South Africa. This is a universal message and faith and religion. And it's the core of it is not going to look different necessarily. I mean, the outworking might based on your cultural context, but it's a universal message for everyone. And so I think how that kind of changed my view of Christianity in some ways is that I think it's unhealthy to have a Christianity that is overly preoccupied on the politics of a certain country or on seeing certain outcomes happen. We should be asking the question of, what does it mean to be a Christian in any context?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And this actually kind of came up I haven't released it yet, but in another podcast interview.
Okay.
Which is, it's really interesting now it's come up again. But the idea that if we were to bring Christianity into another culture via missionaries or what have you, it would find some way to be able to apply to that culture, and then the people could embrace it in a healthy way, not in ways that it's been presented in the past.
Yeah.
And that also there are universal truths to it that supersede any cultural differences. So the example I actually used in the other episode was to love your neighbor, unless you're a hermit or a monk living somewhere. Who doesn't have a neighbor? Who doesn't handle money daily in some way or have to think about money? I don't know why I'm blanking on all of Jesus' teachings right now. But yes, that makes sense.
The teachings, the golden rule of Christianity, to love your neighbor as yourself. That is a universal teaching that pretty much could do good in any culture or society.
Right.
Jesus, the gospel message of Jesus dying for the sins of people and redeeming them, that applies to all people. A Christianity that is too preoccupied with political outcomes, which I think sometimes is what we have in the United States, this preoccupation with advancing the social causes that we believe in, or seeing certain people be in government. I guess in light of Christianity being a global religion, sometimes that just doesn't land with me very well. Is that really the number one goal? Are we too focused on trying to make the country Christian and making that a core tenet of Christianity? If you're a Christian, you will advance these beliefs or causes. Whereas that might not be relevant to someone who is a Christian living in China, or a Christian who's living under an authoritarian government and they have no hope of even changing anything about the political system of the country they live in. They just need to focus on living their daily life faithfully.
Right.
So it kind of broadened my views on the application of Christianity.
And I've come to see that it is an important question to ask oneself, because I'm not saying a Christian should never run for office. I'm not saying a Christian should not vote. I think both of those things are actually really important. And I feel this is somewhere we probably would land in the same page over. But I see now that the question I must ask myself first, before I I guess you mentioned, assume that these social issues are what I'm supposed to stand for if I call myself a Christian in the United States, is to see, okay, what did Jesus prioritize? He prioritized community. He hung out with 12 guys. They walked around for 3 years together and hung out and helped the poor and the lame and the blind around them, as well as teaching. He went around healing people, telling them that there is a hope, reminding people of the gospel and the good news.
Yeah.
But I see now that what Jesus cared about was actually very few things. Right? It would be very few core tenets such as the kingdom of God or loving your neighbor,
right,
or caring for the poor. Then from there, okay, whether or not you should vote for somebody, whether or not you should go picket outside a certain institution, I think that becomes more of a gray area. But I'm seeing now the causes that Christ really stood for were few in number ultimately.
Yeah.
And more heaven focused than earth focused.
Yeah, for sure. I think, in Jesus's day, we are kind of approaching this from a democracy perspective where we actually have a voice in society.
Right, right.
And I think in Jesus's day, it's accurate to say under Roman rule in that area, there was no, I don't want to say there weren't, I don't think there were elections. I don't know that. But I don't think there were elections. I mean, there was an emperor.
Maybe rigged elections.
Yeah, there was an emperor. And there was a governor that ruled over Judea, right? And I don't know that. I mean, the classic thing that you hear around Christmas time is that the Jewish people of the day were maybe hoping for someone who would overthrow their political oppressors.
Right. They still thought about that. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it didn't seem Jesus's main motivation was bringing about political change. It was more about the change of people's hearts.
Mm.
And I mean, that's the super countercultural thing about him hanging out with tax collectors, aka people who took advantage of other people,
right,
and collected far more tax than they were supposed to.
Modern day Jesus would have hung out in front of the IRS building, waited for people to get off work and gone a beer with
modern day Jesus would have hung out with the tax guy who is falsifying tax returns to pad his own pocket, and then invite him over to dine with him.
Yeah. I love that image.
And love that person so that they are changed.
Right.
And he wouldn't be seeking, at least the Jesus of the Gospels didn't seem to be advocating for a wholesale reform of the Roman tax system, because it just probably wasn't realistic. It wasn't realistic.
You don't think Jesus could have gotten enough signatures?
Oh, man.
Yeah, to wrap up, I think something I wanted to make sure I mentioned was, again, ethnocentrism in and of itself is not a negative term, although it has been used as a negative term. And I hope this conversation, or I should say, at least for me, my goal isn't to shame people into, oh, you need to travel more, you need to be more woke, or you got to open your eyes to what's going on because you're trapped in your little America bubble. I think, again, traveling, not everyone gets to do it. And it's a great opportunity if you can. Even when I went to Kentucky, I was like, this is
different,
to say the least.
Yeah.
I don't know what other word I would use.
Yeah.
I don't know why I even tried eating Chinese food in Kentucky. But what a blessing it is when I get to, you get to be able to have opportunities to experience other cultures and to see that maybe the answer here is there really isn't a center, and it's just every opportunity is a chance to be able to set that baseline for happiness and see that other people can be happy with what they have. Is there anything that we missed that you wanted to bring up?
You know what? I think, yeah, the last thing I'll say to kind of bring home the point of what is the center of the world. It's like when God looks down at the world, who does he see first? I don't know if he sees anybody first necessarily, but it's just like, if all people are made in the image of God and he loves all people in a grand theological sense of they are his creation, then I think God's care for the world extends beyond your individual country. And I think that another thought experiment would be if alien life showed up at planet Earth and they were trying to figure out where's the center of the Earth, where are things happening here?
Right. We only have like 3 days.
Yeah. They're going to spend a lot of time in the East because there's a lot of people there doing a lot of things, So I just think that it can be mind altering. It can be perspective shifting to realize that there are a lot of people living a different life experience than you. And yes, ethnocentrism is a completely normal thing. You're gonna view the world through your own culture. You have no way of not viewing the world through your own culture. I think that, the negative of that can be that, okay, my culture is superior and my customs are better and I need to make everybody else me and they should be me. Mm-hmm. That whole idea of civilizing the earth or whatever you think is civilized, right? But the goal, kind of going back to your distinction between sociology and anthropology, before making judgments on another culture, it's pretty important just to put yourself in that culture's shoes and try to understand the way that they live through their perspective.
Right.
And I just think that would lead to a lot more understanding of human beings, humans understanding each other, taking a step back and not looking down from our culture, but looking at their culture from within, if you can.
I didn't plan this, but on a very Christmassy note, that is the incarnation, which is pretty cool to me.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's super true. Yeah. Like, yes, God did not think it better to just stay in heaven. He became flesh and blood and dwelt among us. That's pretty amazing.
Wow. I didn't expect to hear a sermon today, but that was an amazing sermon.
Awesome. Well, thanks for chatting.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show, Caleb.
Thank you.
Come again.
When I have something else interesting to say, maybe I'll be back.
Okay, cool.